If you got yourself a nice ripe cantaloupe and you took a Sharpie and you painted a smiley face on it, maybe a mustache, maybe some glasses, and then you stuck a wig on top of it, possibly a hat, who knows, would the average Democrat voter vote for that cantaloupe if it was on the ballot with a D next to its name? I think after what we've witnessed these last two elections now, we've got no other recourse but to surmise that the answer to that question is quite emphatically yes. And I trust I haven't been too on the nose with the fruits and vegetables metaphor here, because for the record, I did say mustache and not goatee. And I gave it a wig. So nobody can accuse me of constructing that entire analogy just to make fun of His Excellency, the Senator-elect from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Mr. John Fetterman. But since Mr. Fetterman's name just came up in a totally organic, non-premeditated way, let's take stock of where we are at this, the most embarrassingly absurd moment in the entire history of American politics. A lot of people were disturbed, and not without good reason in my judgment, when a man got elected president in 2020 who campaigned mostly from his basement on a webcam, who was very clearly suffering symptoms of rather advanced dementia, who clearly had lost several steps and at least 10 miles off his fastball since he was in his prime, back when he could take pride in being universally regarded as the dumbest guy in the Senate. And many of those same people were disturbed, and rightfully so, by the fact that the person elected to the vice presidency seemed even more clueless and more inept than the 78-year-old dementia patient with one foot in the grave who had been selected to be on the ticket with her. Not because there was any prospect of her doing anything useful during her term in office, but because, well, her dad's Jamaican and she's got girly bits between her legs. That's how we pick our vice presidents now, because God bless America. And that was all pretty bad, but now? Now we've seen a man actively suffering from brain damage elected to the U.S. Senate, a man who has difficulty completing one coherent sentence in his own native language, who may yet prove incapable of reciting his oath of office when it's swearing-in day. And perhaps, maybe, if we're offering maximal benefit of the doubt, you could justify it. If John Fetterman was some noted intellectual with a track record of achievement who just got knocked off his feet temporarily by an unfortunate medical issue, and shit, never mind senator, I'm still having a bitch of a time figuring out how this guy got himself elected lieutenant governor, like of a state. So he was the mayor of Braddock, which, as I understand it, is not an incorporated town, so mayor is more of a ceremonial volunteer type position, you know, like how Johnny Grant used to be mayor of Hollywood, except Fetterman, astoundingly, he somehow managed to utterly wreck the place anyway. So the guy gets himself elected lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania when he's a guy in his late 40s, a man exactly my age, who quite literally had never had a real job before, and still hasn't, unless you count lieutenant governor as a real job, which, I mean, come on. Have things ground to a halt in Pennsylvania since lieutenant governor missed 7 months of work from medical incapacity combined with cringe-inducing campaign appearances? His absence probably has had about as much impact as when Mayor Pete took 4 months off to stay at home and chest feed the twins while Chasen sings Broadway show tunes in the background. Or at least that's how I picture their home life. I bet I'm not too far off, though. Now, there's already been thousands of gallons of ink spilled, lots of teeth gnashed, lots of garments rent by people on the right, trying to make sense of how the GOP could have crapped the bed so badly in a midterm that by all rights they should have won in very dominant fashion. But tonight I am more interested with trying to account for the behavior of Democrat voters, who are all too happy to install literal fruits and vegetables, people who are barely alive and probably ought to be receiving full-time care, into some of the highest offices in the land. And I have two overarching theories which, taken together, I think might go a long way toward explaining it. So go and grab yourself a beverage and meet me back here in 5 seconds while Jim Eagle hits the music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we eat nothing but mutton and venison, we drink nothing but ale and meat, and we use fruits and vegetables only for target practice. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. Theory number one. is that we have entered an altogether new phase of U.S. politics in which the two major parties, these two ancient ossified institutions that we have been saddling ourselves with since before your great-great-grandparents were born, that they're no longer vessels of the right and left per se, or of liberalism and conservatism, but rather they have been reduced to just another set of dueling consumer brand names, just another false dichotomy where it's expected that one has to choose the one or the other and stick with it, irrationally if necessary, for the remainder of one's natural-born life, like Coke or Pepsi, Ford or Chevrolet, Beatles or Stones. Slowly but surely, as our two trusty old factions have aged far beyond their usefulness, they have managed to complete the transition from political parties to brand identities. But this theory has serious limitations, and here's why. Because look at how many mixed tickets we saw in this election, where people voted in ways that you just can't reconcile with any sort of coherent political or philosophical worldview. Georgia is probably the most striking example, where you had tens of thousands of people on the same ballot selecting Brian Kemp for governor and Raphael Warnock for senator. Or in New York, where tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, they voted crazy Kathy Hochul for governor, and then they turned right around and voted Republican in their local House race. There's just no way you can cast those two votes and be unduly burdened by any sort of sensible thought process, which brings us neatly along to theory number 2, where voting no longer has anything to do with party loyalty, and the voter views the ballot as merely a series of popularity contests, like a reality TV show, where you're voting for which contestant you want to see voted off the island. And it's just a matter of, well, do I like this guy better or that guy better? In other words, an approach to voting that is untethered from party loyalty, where each choice is down to, well, I'd rather have a beer with this guy, or he's got an annoying voice, so I'm going to vote for the other dude, or she wears such ugly clothes and I hate her hair, I'll take a hard pass on that one, I'll vote for her opponent, and the whole country will prosper from the fact that I have fulfilled my civic duty. And of course, it can't be ignored that the proliferation of things like universal mail-in ballots, irrespective of the extent to which they promote and facilitate widespread industrialized vote fraud. And yes, YouTube, I will proudly accept your second strike if you want to drop me on one for having said that. So fucking go for it. They also promote and facilitate lots of dumbass people voting who ought not to vote, who don't know jack shit about any damn thing, but since you've made the thing so simple and so easy and so convenient, since you've reduced it to being an exercise that requires about as much thoughtfulness as picking out your goddamn lotto numbers, well, the results continue to be as predictable as they are depressing. I have seen lots of people in my lifetime elected to the U.S. Senate who were far too dumb to warrant being installed in an office of that station. Lots of people with crazy, indefensible ideas. Lots of people who clearly were only in it for the power and the prestige. But never, not until the midterm election of 2022, did we see partisan tribalism turn into such an unfathomably absurd spectacle that a brain-damaged 54-year-old Trustafarian, never gainfully employed in his entire life, who can't even bother getting dressed most days, who's got a 50-50 shot of reciting his own name correctly, got elected to the U.S. Senate. They took an actual vegetable. They put a D next to his name on the ballot, and the vegetable won. That was a real thing that happened. And yes, I know that the standard rejoinder is to say, but Dr. Oz was such a terrible candidate. Yes, he was. Nobody was more emphatic about that right from the beginning than we were on this program. I mean, look. When your idea of connecting with working class voters, when the opening salvo of your general election campaign is to go into an upscale grocery store and say, guys, will you look at this? Can you believe how much we have to pay for high-end designer mustard in Joe Biden's America? Then yes, you are indeed a very terrible candidate, and you probably will manage to lose to a cantaloupe with a goatee. So very well done indeed. They can take our crudité, but they'll never take our freedom, right, Dr. Oz? Great work, idiot. But at least if I learned anything in this election cycle, it is the word crudité. So I guess I'm permanently in Dr. Oz's debt for that one. All those years I spent calling it a veggie platter. No idea how gauche and common I sounded. And I guarantee you all, next year at Curmudgeon Fest 2023, the crudité platters will blow your fucking mind. Wall-to-wall crudité, bitches. It's going to be crudité palooza. So you've got a very severe and probably fatal, if you're going to look at things from the GOP side, disparity in brand loyalty between the one party and the other. Moreover, you're operating in a world where, depending on what state you're in, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the electorate is unaffiliated with either major party. The pollsters and the fake news media, they like to lump that all into a big group called independents, but that's pretty dumb and pretty reductive, because you've got all manner of things contained in that group. You've got your libertarians, your Greens, your peace and freedom types, and all those. You've got people for whom independent means they actually are registered members of the American Independent Party. And then you've got a much larger group, the group of which I'm a member, and quite possibly you are too, of voters without any party affiliation. And I think, obviously, guessing rather wildly here, but I would have to surmise that group probably accounts for the majority of your split ticket ballots, where you've got people who vote for left-wing Democrats and right-wing Republicans on the same ticket, seemingly in defiance of any consistency or good sense. The current electoral calculus, obviously, is much better for the Democrats than it is for the Republicans, for the simple reason that the phenomenon we've been talking about, that reflexive mentality of, well, damn it, I'm a Democrat, my daddy was a Democrat, his daddy was a Democrat before him, so I'm going to vote Democrat even if I wind up sending an actual potted houseplant to the U.S. Senate, where one's party affiliation is so ingrained that it's really more like a religious affiliation. That mentality is far, far more commonplace on the left than it ever will be on the right. You want evidence? The current Republican leader in the Senate has an 18% approval rating among his own party's voters, and a 7% approval rating overall, which I'm told is the #1 lowest approval rating for any national political figure since the advent of the polling industry. So well done, Mitch McConnell. Take a bow. You have succeeded in etching your name into the history books, and you can look long and hard. You can look until the end of time, and you're never going to find something similar on the Democrat side. So where does that leave us? Well, it would seem to leave us in a world where Democrats are always going to be wildly competitive in every election, no matter how much crippling incompetence they display, no matter how pervasive their corruption, no matter how impossibly unimpressive their candidates are. Because who needs impressive candidates when you can win without them? Who needs a coherent message when you can get people to vote for a cantaloupe with a goatee just by saying the Republicans are a bunch of Nazis and they want to come take your abortions away? It shouldn't be that easy, but it is. And we can't call it an aberration anymore because it is the trend now. So what does it mean for people on the right? It means they desperately need to arrange new and better representation for themselves. It was widely believed that the Republicans were going to clean house this year, just because the Democrats have spent the past 2 years completely wrecking the country. But that didn't happen. In what should have been, by all rights, according to all the historical precedents, one of the most lopsided midterms in history, when the Democrats have finished counting all the ballots that they keep magically discovering in those dumpsters and Ryder trucks, allegedly, they may have not even managed to flip either house of Congress. And why? Well, you tell me how fired up your base is supposed to be when the leaders of your party in Congress are Kevin McCarthy and Mitch freaking McConnell with his 18% in-party approval rating. So ultimately, the hard question is begged. What benefit are American conservatives gaining from continuing to hitch their wagon to the corpse of the Republican elephant? And more crucially, what prospect is there of this Republican Party drawing voters away from the other side, which you sometimes have to do to win elections after all? What does this Republican Party offer that could sway the number of independent voters that you need to sway in order to win presidential elections in this day and age? When Trump won in 2016, it wasn't because of the GOP. It was in spite of the GOP. And the people who run the GOP still want nothing more fervently than to be rid of Trump, to put MAGA in the rearview mirror, and to go back to being the party of John McCain and Willard Romney, the party that loses with dignity and doesn't stand in the way, doesn't interfere unduly with the aims of the larger globalist neoliberal project. Meanwhile, the Democrats are out there peddling a worldview that should be abhorrent to any reasonable person with a functioning intellect and a basic sense of decency. A worldview that says drag queen shows for little kids are perfectly healthy and normative. A worldview that says if you don't want gay porn novels in your local school library, then you're morally indistinguishable from Dr. Joseph Goebbels. A worldview that says it wasn't a mistake to shut down the entire society, confine people in their homes, ruin their businesses, and enforce 2 years of mandatory religious face coverings over a Chinese flu virus bioweapon that was largely funded with your tax dollars by the same unhinged public health maniacs who fancy themselves the ayatollahs of your new state religion. I think there was a widespread belief going into this election that if nothing else, no matter how worthless the Republican Party is, no matter how unexceptional their slate of candidates might happen to be, the Democrats are at least going to receive some sort of smackdown for their cartoonishly overreactive response to the stupid Chinese flu. A response that caused incalculable harm to innumerable people, and most or all of it needlessly. Because that's what midterm elections are supposed to be about. That's what they have been about traditionally. A referendum on the party that's currently in power and all the things that they have done in the preceding 2 years. But I think we can throw that precedent pretty well out the window now. If a party can govern as badly as the Democrats have governed since January of last year, and very nearly or possibly retain power in both houses at the midterm, all bets are off now. Anything is liable to happen. But needless to say, and you knew I would not sign off without saying it, nobody is gaining anything either on the left or on the right from our continuing national insistence on clinging to the same two parties we had in 1870. If I had a nickel for every lame excuse I ever heard down through the years for clinging to this stupid damn duocracy, I think I could almost build a brick shithouse out of nickels. And wouldn't that be a sight to see? And I really hate to paraphrase John Lennon of all people, but just imagine if we all woke up tomorrow and our political parties didn't exist, and we were all forced to actually discuss our respective views without any recourse to tribalism. If it took more to win an election than saying, vote for me because that other guy wants to take your abortions away. Just imagine how nice that might be. And I have to give it to the Democrats begrudgingly for how effectively and dishonestly and hubristically they co-opted the language of personal freedom in drumming up the unmarried woman vote. What was it I read? That the Democrats won unmarried women by some 30 points or something ridiculous like that? That is freaking mental. But what a great example of a total inversion of reality. The Supreme Court ruled, correctly, that a previous Supreme Court had overstepped its authority and the issue was returned to the states. But in a fantastic triumph of creative marketing, the Dems managed to turn that into a message of the evil conservative Republican Supreme Court wants to put the government between you and your doctor. So the court taking power away from itself was successfully portrayed as some sort of proactive conservative tyranny. And hey, I guess if you can get away with it every so often, you just have to give your adversary a polite golf clap and a tip of the cap for effecting such a bold feat of evil genius. And I don't have anything else for tonight, so I'm going to take my leave if that's quite all right. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Fair winds, following seas, and all that. I will see you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.